We're going to record to the cloud. And good to see everyone. Thanks for being here. We're excited to have our guest speaker, Noah Silber-Coates, talk to us about water scarcity, ways to kind of manage what's going on with water in the Southwest. But before we get going, we're going to talk about current events, a little bit about what we've been experiencing here in Arizona. So I'm going to go ahead and admit those folks. And we're grateful to have you all in here. Great. So welcome. A little bit about how it operates. I try and keep it fast. So I talk to you for maybe 10 minutes about what's going on in the state, and our guest speaker will talk to you for maybe 10 or 15 minutes about what they have to share. Really good information. If we have time at the end to ask questions, that's when we'll have that, and a brief Q&A at that time. So hopefully we won't waste your time. We'll get some good information for you, and we'll go ahead and get started with some good news. It's actually not so bad if we look at our data from the start of January. So from January 1st, if we're looking at the statewide precipitation, not so bad. You can see up in the northern portions of the state, it's a little bit better than what we've been seeing in the southern portions. But take a look at those temperatures, departures from the norm. It's been cold, and we know it's been cold since last November. It's been cold. And so that's really kind of buffeting out a little bit based on what we've been experiencing this last month. So now let's just look at the last month, which was included in what we just looked at. And unfortunately, it's been really, really hot, really, really dry. You can see that we have had some precipitation in July, and that's been a good thing. But overall, most of the state has been dry. The state overall has been very, very hot in July. And the reason why, a persistent and strong ridge of high pressure that's just been hanging out. And we really like to get hot. If you remember last June, this past June, it was really cold, but and we needed it to get warm. But unfortunately, it's getting a little bit too warm, and it's staying in the wrong place. If you recall, last Monday, just a couple of days ago, we did have it set up right where we wanted it to be, and we did get some storms coming in, but it's been unusual. Because that ridge has been so strong, so persistent, there are records breaking all over the South, the Southwest, and you can see some of them here. This is from yesterday maximum temperatures, and you can see if they're now the first or the second highest in those locations from those particular weather stations. So it's been hot all across, nothing new. We are definitely, we've all been experiencing this. And of course, it has been breaking records here in Arizona. When we're looking at these high temperatures, we're probably going to have another 3 days of these kinds of high temperatures. Yesterday, we had 119 degrees. And these are, when we're talking about the Phoenix temperature, and that's what I'm talking about here, those Phoenix temperatures are taken from the weather station right by right by the airport. And that's right on Priest and 202. So it's right there on the border of Tempe. And it can get really, really hot right in through there. That gives us 20 days in a row of temperatures of 110 degrees or higher. If we look at our stats in Phoenix, we are on average, the early 1900s, there were about 5 days every year that had temperatures of 110 degrees or higher. If we look at the last decade, that now gives us 5 times that many days a year, over 25 days a year in Phoenix of 110 degrees or higher. So it is definitely getting warmer. June, if we pop into June, there were 3 days that had 110 degrees or higher. So now we're at a total for Phoenix of 23 days of 110 degrees or higher. And so, looking at the next today, tomorrow, Saturday, probably going to add those to that as well. So it's been very warm, but it's also not cooling off at night. So yesterday we had another record, which was the minimum temperature, where we didn't get below 97 degrees at Phoenix Sky Harbor. It is a record maximum minimum, and that beats what we had in 2003 with 96 degrees. It never cooled off below 96 degrees on that date in 2003. And then yesterday, it never cooled off below 97 degrees yesterday. And so that's now 11 days in a row of minimum temperatures above 90 degrees at Phoenix Sky Harbor. I mean, I remember 122 degrees. I remember that date very well in 1990. We were cooling off effectively. In 1990, we cooled off by about 30 degrees. Right now, when we're hitting these maximum min temperatures, so those 90-degree pluses, we're only cooling off by about 20 degrees at night. So from the maximum temperature to the minimum temperature. So it's not cooling off as effectively. We're seeing other records across the state. Winslow has a record of 18 days in a row of 100 degrees or higher. Flagstaff tied with 7 days of 90 degrees or higher. Tucson has a record 11 days of 110 degrees or higher. So it is hot everywhere. And then something to look at when we're looking at these heat maps, they're showing us the average monthly conditions across the state. So this is a statewide map that we're looking at, a heat map. And you can see we have the maximums, we have the minimums. The larger heat map that you're looking at is the average. And you can see as we're looking on the bottom, you're going to have the years. And as we progress over to more current years on the right-hand side. And so you see a little bit more of those orange colors, which means above average conditions for that month. If you look at the maximum conditions, the maximum temperatures, these are statewide numbers, you can see that it's overall, there are a lot of a mix of those maximum temperatures above average. There's a few in there. You see the blues below average, but then pop down the heat map underneath that, and it's showing you that started with blue, and then it went over into a lot of those oranges on the right-hand side of that heat map. Those are the minimum temperatures, statewide minimum temperatures. And you can see that those statewide minimum temperatures have been increasing. So more and more above average minimum temperatures statewide. And that definitely has something to do with population. We're going to zoom in here to Phoenix, and you can see Maricopa County. Maricopa County is the hottest, most populous county in the country. And of course, Tucson, Phoenix, Flagstaff is the fastest growing urban corridor. You're looking at images showing population in the Phoenix area, so Camelback Mountain, what it used to look like and how it's grown. And as we're growing, we're also putting in more urban structures. So you put in the sidewalks, you put in the roadways, you put in different materials that are holding on to that sunlight. And it's not that our daytime temperatures are always getting hotter, it's that our nighttime temperatures are just not cooling off. And based on the parking lots, the sidewalks, those have different colors that we measure as albedo, surface reflectivity. So darker materials like the parking lots are going to hold on to that sunlight and store it through the day and release it very slowly at night. And so that's allowing us to, well, I guess allow is not the correct term, but that's what's keeping us from cooling off at night in the Phoenix metropolitan area. But every city and town in Arizona has an urban heat island just like this. It may not be as extreme. Phoenix has one of the largest urban heat islands in the world, but we were just up measuring the Sedona urban heat island about 3 weeks ago, and we'll have those numbers to see just where the hotter locations are in town. And that's all a function of what we're seeing with those urban materials, those urban structures. And so then where's the monsoon? As I mentioned, we did have that ridge of high pressure kind of set itself up perfectly where we want it to be in the Four Corners region on Monday. And we did get some precipitation along the rim. We had some down in the Tucson area. And then we had a death storm push up into the Phoenix area, kind of East Mesa area on Monday. But we're still waiting for that proper setup. We need to have that ridge of high pressure. We need to bring that moisture in from the south, and that will trigger our thunderstorms. So we'll see what we can have going on. We're looking at our monsoon precipitation across the state. You can see that we do have some in the northern tier, we have some in the southern tier, but here in central Arizona, not a lot of precipitation going on, a little bit in Globe. And so that becomes an interesting kind of situation. Again, looking at Phoenix precipitation. If you go and look at Phoenix precipitation and we look at April, May, and June, right now we've got 0 measurable precipitation for April, May, and June. Now that's happened other times before when we're looking at that 14 years before, where Phoenix hasn't had measurable precipitation April, May, and June. But there's never been a time where Phoenix has not had precipitation April, May, June, July. So I'm going to hope for climatology to carry us through the rest of the month and get us some precipitation in Phoenix. Now, when we look at no measurable precipitation, what that means is it had to have been at least 0.01 inches or 1/100th of an inch. A trace of an inch, you'll see it as a T on maps, that doesn't go into the categories as measurable precipitation. A trace of precipitation is 0.001 or 100 or 1,000th of an inch. And so we're still seeing hope for our July precipitation to take us out of what we have going on there. Show Low's been doing great. Tucson's been doing okay, but most of the state is below average. And if we're looking at the short-term outlooks, everything's going to stay hot according to these short-term outlooks. And we've got the 6 to 10 days saying near normal, which means potential. We could have some precipitation. If we pop in and look at the 8 to 14 days, you can see again, still really hot, but a little bit of above average chances for precipitation, not necessarily where we want it to be, but hopefully we can get some precipitation. We're supposed to get some moisture into Arizona this weekend. That'll hopefully cool us off in the Phoenix area, and we'll see what we can get with that precipitation. The short-term drought maps came out this morning, and you can see that because of the lack of precipitation, we're well below average with our monsoon precipitation. And we've expanded a little bit of the abnormally dry conditions in the east side of the state. So you can see that we've got Greenlee and Graham, a little bit of Apache County, and then Cochise, Santa Cruz, bringing in that abnormally dry condition based on our lack of precipitation with our monsoon. So then looking at our long-term drought, fortunately, when we look at our long-term drought, we're looking at much longer timeframes. We go back 48, 36, 24 months. And so this brings in our wet winter. It brings in our last wet 2 summers, and that kind of helps keep that long-term drought from being impacted fully by what we're seeing with our lack of precipitation this summer. Hopefully won't last too long. So then when we're looking at how dry it's been across the state, how hot it's been across the state, that does have impacts with wildfire potential. So you can see that there are significant wildfire potential expansion in July, largely from heat, also from lightning. And so hopefully we don't have too much happening with our wildfire potential, but it absolutely is a situation to pay attention to. When we're looking at El Nino, where that lands up, it still looks to be on trajectory to be a strengthening El Nino this winter, which in Arizona, we always appreciate the statistical relationship with El Nino and our winter precipitation. So hopefully this continues to play out statistically where we can have more winter precipitation. And so kind of as a summary, we had record-breaking temperatures across the state this last July. June was colder than normal. If we go back all the way to January, it's been a great year so far, but we do pay attention to what's been happening and the strength of that heat and lack of precipitation this July that is impacting what's going on with our short-term drought. Monsoon is still delayed. Hopefully it'll start to pick up, and El Nino looks to be strengthening for our winter precipitation. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker, which is Noah Silvercoats. And we're so grateful to have Noah coming with us today. Noah's a postdoctoral fellow with the USDA Southwest Climate Hub, and his work focuses on identifying effective solutions to water scarcity. And that's for the region, the Southwest. He leads development of the Water Adaptation Techniques Atlas, which, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, that's WADA. Is that WADA? That is awesome. It's an online tool that documents solutions. Prior to joining the Hub, he completed a PhD in down south at U of A. We're glad to have him up here in central Arizona with us. His dissertation focused on political economy, legalized cannabis agriculture in Oregon. This is interesting. Conducted research on agave agriculture, which means the spirits right there. Am I seeing that correctly? And from Sonora. And also conflicts over governance of hydropower development in central Mexico. He's based in Tucson, and also what I enjoy doing, finding those watery spots hidden in the desert in your spare time. So grateful to have you, Noah. You can go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Great. Thanks, Erin. Let me go ahead and share the screen. There it is. All right. Well, thanks for the climate update, I guess. So you're saying it's hot.
So saying it's hot.
I wouldn't know. I'm down here in Tucson, cooling off, 85 degrees overnight. What a luxury. Okay. Are we seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, thanks for the invitation and the introduction. So I want to share with you all the project that I've been working on for about the past year since I joined the Southwest Climate Hub, which is WADA, or the Water Adaptation Techniques Atlas. And just a bit about the Climate Hub. So Climate Hubs were formed in 2014, and basically it's this cross-agency entity within the USDA that's focused on delivering climate-informed information that's useful and usable for resource managers and other decision makers to support robust and healthy agriculture across the US. So our Southwest region, it's Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah, and we also cover Hawaii and the US affiliated Pacific Islands. The project we're looking at today is really focused on those mainland Southwest states. So what we do at the Climate Hub, it's synthesizing science and data. So we're not exactly, out there conducting original research, but we're mostly bringing it together into synthesizing it into useful and usable. That often means a tool. So that's what I'm going to show you today, an online tool that helps you kind of sift through large bodies of research that are out there. And then we use that in outreach and convening and people and training. Yeah, so I've got the website for you there and QR code if you wanted to scan that. This is kind of beta version. It's under development. We're still building it out. So I started by working in Arizona, conveniently, because I'm based here and have some experience here. And we're going to be expanding this across the region, including also California with partners there. And so basically we're looking for interventions in water management that have some evidence of impact on the hydrological cycle. So we're casting a very broad net in terms of what we're considering here, and we're looking across the region. Right, so what do we mean by solutions, right? Arguably, like the whole condition of life in the Southwest is about adapting to water scarcity, right? It's a water limited environment. And we can look historically at techniques developed by indigenous cultures, right? So on the top left there, that's Hopi dryland farming, right? Rain-fed farming that's still practiced up on the mesas in Hopi. Gravel mulch that allowed Pueblo cultures to expand into the Rio Grande Valley by planting, again, rain-fed fields on the top of mesas and terraces, right? And then we have this kind of big shift in the kinds of solutions as Euro-American settlers come in, right? We have, ways of pumping water very quickly and cheaply out of the ground. Also a type of solution to water scarcity, right? But maybe not a sustainable one, definitely not a sustainable one, right? So when we're thinking about solutions, solutions are going to, frame the problem in a certain way, right? Is it a problem of we don't have enough water, so we need to pump more? Or is it a problem of, how can we adapt to the limited rainfall that we have? And solutions are going to create winners and losers, right? It might be that, pumping or conveying water from over there, is going to solve my water scarcity problem, but it might be taking water away from someone else, right? So solutions can be maladaptive, right? And they might work in one context and not in another. So when we're thinking about collecting these in the atlas, we're not starting by saying, let's only get the good ones. Like we're saying, let's look at, what responses are out there to water scarcity. And then we'll think about what are the trade-offs associated with each one, right? Because there's no silver bullet, there's no magic solution, right? There's always a trade-off, and there's no one thing that's gonna, solve our water scarcity problem. But of course, when we say there's no silver bullet, yeah, go ahead, Erin.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It looks like subtitles are up on top of the screen. Is there any way to kind of minimize that?
Oh.
It's got to give subtitles a try.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No. Yeah, but I don't want to turn it on.
There you go.
Okay. Anyway, so I was, so now it's subtitling me. Well, I guess that's gonna be how that is. So I was leading up to a joke about silver bullets, right? So we have cloud seeding, which is about as close to a literal silver bullet as you can get, right? Releasing particles of silver iodide into the atmosphere to try and generate more precipitation, which is of course not actually a silver bullet, certainly not going to solve our water scarcity problems. But this is a recent project funded by Bureau of Reclamation and Southern Nevada Water Authority, and they're doing winter cloud seeding up in the headwaters of the Colorado River. So just to give you an idea of what WADA looks like and how it's organized. So each case is pinned to a specific location. We've got 11 kind of main categories. I'll go into them more a bit later, but it's just kind of ways to reduce or conserve, reduce water use or conserve water, ways to get new supply, or ways of moving water around, changing how water is allocated between different users. So this view is showing all the cases, and then we zoom in here. So we've got the filter tool at the top, and here I've selected, so each category has subcategories. So within crop choice and rotation, which is basically anything to do with what you're planting and when you're planting it, I've selected alternative crops, right? What would be alternative lower water use crops to the ones that are commonly planted. And then here you can see if you mouse over a case, you get the just very short description to see what it is. And if you click on it, well, we'll come back to that. So at the top, you can see a list of everything that you filtered. So again, this is the alternative crops shown as a list. And then if we click on a case, right, we get a description here. So this is about some trials of agave that were going on in the 80s that the University of Arizona was doing. Placed the location at the Safford Agricultural Center, which is where one of the locations for the study. It found it was very promising. They were able to, produce a large amount of sugar, which could be used for biofuel, or of course for making spirits, with a very low amount of water, and it has other, benefits like erosion control, and possibly could be interplanted with annual grasses and these things, and of course has a long, millennia long history in the region. And so you get the other kind of categories that are marked, which tell you about, what type of water use are we thinking about? So is it agriculture? Is it about urban water use? Is it about the environment or some combination thereof? What kinds of water users? Are we thinking about farmers or an irrigation district? And what are the specific organizations involved? So each case will have these tags that allow you to search and filter. And then you have the direct link to the original source, right, which I've shown here, the study from 1985, I think. 1985, yeah. And so I'll just share a few examples that kind of fit into the question of, okay, if agriculture is using 75 to 80% of the water in Arizona or across the region, what are some ways that we can sustain agriculture with less water, right? So here I've selected cases that are either in that crop choice and rotation, what to plant and when to plant it, and in the irrigation technology and timing, so how you're delivering water to plants. So I've got 60 matches here. And you'll see there's a few in New Mexico, and over the coming months, it'll be a couple, maybe 150 more for New Mexico to kind of match what we have in Arizona. I'll just highlight a few interesting ones. So top left here, this is one irrigation type of barley called solar barley. This came out of research that started at the U of A kind of in the 1970s, and this solar variety was released in 2006. And this is a study looking at how its roots respond to drought conditions. So you can see this red line here, that's the caliche kind of natural concrete layer that we get in a lot of our desert soils. And you can see the one irrigation barley punching its roots through that, which if you've ever tried to dig through it, that's very impressive, right? Versus the kind of standard hybrid barley that has again, under drought conditions, very minimal roots. So, right, this is a crop that's growing with like 4 inches of irrigation in the winter, and maybe 1 pre-irrigation, so maybe 8 inches. But compared to many feet that you're using for a lot of the summer crops. In the middle here, this is buffalo gourd, a native plant, really interesting. There was a research program, again, kind of 70s, 80s at the U of A and also in New Mexico, looking at this plant as a crop. It has a few uses. So the seeds can be used to express an oil that's similar to soybean oil. And then after you do that, you get a protein meal that you could feed to cattle or other livestock. And then it has a perennial tuber that can be used to make biofuel. So a really interesting crop. There was a lot of momentum behind it in the early 80s, and then it kind of fizzled because the infrastructure wasn't there, the market wasn't there, grants ran out, but they were growing this crop successfully with 10 inches of irrigation, out in, I think that's basically near Picacho Peak somewhere, Red Rock kind of area. This one on the top right, people may be familiar with. This is N-Drip. So this Israeli company that's developed this new drip technology. They're working with the Central Arizona Project, Colorado River Indian tribes, other partners in the state. Basically a low pressure drip irrigation that's allowing them to get the same kind of crop yields with about 50% of the water. So that's a really interesting, promising thing. I'm sure a lot of us are watching. This graph here is from a study working with pecan growers. And basically what they've done is given the growers soil moisture sensors and calibrated them to local conditions so that they can use that to make decisions about when to irrigate, as opposed to counting the number of days or just observing conditions, whatever they might have done before. And basically what they found is growers doing that were able to reduce the number of irrigations from an average of 12 to an average of 9, right? So they basically cut their water use by 25% just from, having this kind of simple instrumentation. The onions here are from a study in New Mexico, and this is an interesting sort of paradox of efficiency question. So this study is looking at drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, and flood irrigation, which is the practice of the onion growers in New Mexico. And for the most part, onion growers are irrigating at a deficit. They're giving the plants less water than what they would actually like, right? And what the study found is that's actually the most efficient irrigation system in terms of how much of the water that you put on a field is being used by the plant, right? So you get less yield, but the plant's actually using the water more efficiently in a sense. And if you were to switch to drip irrigation, right, you would actually have to use more water to make up for the cost of what it costs to install that, and to make up for the yield. So it's a case where the current practice of, flood irrigation has this reputation of being very wasteful, but in fact, in this case, right, it's actually the most efficient practice out there, and switching to drip would actually involve increasing water use to make up for the cost. And then the lower left here, from a news story out of Yuma, where they're looking at basically this nano clay. I talked to Robert Mason the other day. So basically, this company's developed a way of slicing clay particles into fine little sheets that they then can spray across a sandy desert field. And the idea is it will help retain moisture in the soil. So they're doing tests on this. As I said, I talked to him the other day. He was a little, he's very skeptical, which is good. They're doing the science to see how well it works. And it may or may not be an effective solution to, help retain soil moisture in desert soils. And then here I've highlighted a few cases that have to do with ranching and rangelands, right? A huge concern for Arizona and New Mexico. And if you see the filter tool here, so I've selected, I've scrolled down and I'm looking now at the crops category. So I've selected things that have to do with cattle and beef. Happen to have one case that's sheep, grassland. So this is kind of one way to see what's to do with ranching and rangelands. And I'll just highlight a few here. So top left, this is a really interesting situation of structures that were built in really kind of 1930s, 40s, 50s, really throughout the Western US, starting with the Civilian Conservation Corps, dams, dikes, terraces that were meant to hold water in the landscape and increase forage. But what's happened over time is, with no maintenance, a big storm comes through, it breaches, and then instead of preventing erosion and holding water, it becomes a nick point, and it creates erosion and flooding. And so there's some folks at the USDA in Tucson. Mary Nichols is looking at mapping these and all of their impacts across the landscape. So an example of a solution that has in fact, created perhaps more problems than what it was meant to do. This fellow here is a churro sheep. So this is an heirloom variety of sheep that was developed by Dene Navajo Nation over several hundred years since it was introduced by the Spanish, very adapted to hot and cold, dry conditions up in the Four Corners. There was a basically federal government program to eliminate these beginning in the 1930s because of supposed overgrazing, and replace them with higher yielding so-called improved varieties, but they don't survive as well in the desert. So there's been this dedicated group of people who are trying to bring back the churro sheep and the genetics of it, and certain qualities that it has for native crafts. And we could also point to work with Raramuri Criollo cattle that's going on, especially in New Mexico. That's again a heritage variety from indigenous people in Chihuahua that's very adapted to desert range conditions. And there's a research program out of the Jornada Experimental Range that's looking at, how do these cattle survive under hotter, drier conditions. Top right here is a research project that happened between the U of A and a district on the Tohono O'odham Nation, kind of collaborative planning, rangeland planning, and they do things like, okay, well, we'll fence off this area, this kind of wet, seasonally wet area, and so that the grass can recover, and then that's a drought reserve, and we can open it up and graze it, when the drought hits. Bottom right here, this is my range log. So this is out of U of A, Mike Crimmins, and Cooperative Extension. So basically they've installed these very rugged but simple rain gauges, and they work with ranchers and install them in kind of remote pastures so that they can track the conditions and make decisions about, when to rotate animals to different pastures. And then returning to the kind of alternative crops question, right? So much of the crops that we grow in the region and the water that we use to do it is growing forage to feed to animals, right? So I think maybe a really urgent question for alternative crops is, what can we replace alfalfa with that has similar nutritional benefits but uses less water? So millet being one example, teff, sorghum is maybe more well known. These are all kind of options that are going to fill that space. And then the final one here is, adding organic matter to the soil, right? Helps retain moisture in the soil. Study out of New Mexico State looking at taking dairy manure waste. If you spread it on rangelands, okay, you get benefits of holding more moisture in the soil. There's also questions I would want to ask about, what kinds of potential contaminants or pollutants are you adding, and there's water quality concerns. So again, trade-offs there. So this is just a little taste of what's in there. And I really want to just say, we're open to suggestions and feedback. What did we miss? What should we include? So please get in touch with me if you want to be a part of building this. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you. That was excellent. I really appreciate your time. I have a quick question, and if anyone has any question, they can put it in the chat and we can ask that. But is there anything that's misunderstood about the tool? Maybe not, if it's not being used correctly or something along those lines?
Well, it's I don't know how people are using it or not. So that's something that we need to think about, how to get that feedback. I've got built in like a kind of a comment form, right? So people can tell me how they're using it, but no one's really using that. Yeah, and I tried to kind of address this up front, is the question of like, so if we're talking, solution, like solution has a very positive connotation, right? But we have things in there that are going to kind of rankle some people if you say that's a solution to water scarcity, because it seems like you're saying that's good. But in fact, what I'm saying is that's an option and there are trade-offs, right? So, one that got that response was Arizona Snow Bowl using treated wastewater to generate snow, right? Which is opposed by and offensive to all the tribes of that region. And someone was like, well, why is that? What kind of solution is that? And my answer is, well, from the point of view of the ski resort, that's a solution to the scarcity of snow, right? That's a solution, but we discussed those trade-offs, and so it's kind of a space for evaluating these different aspects of any solution that you might think of.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's fascinating. I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone for their time. Thanks for coming. I'm going to stop recording and let you know that we do this every month. We do it on the third Thursday of every month at 10 a.m. So hopefully I'll see everyone again. But thanks very much for your time.